5 everyday foods that silently raise your blood sugar dangerously. Have you ever been told that whole grains protect your heart? That oatmeal lowers your cholesterol? That brown rice is a clean carb? Most people have. So for years, these foods have been the foundation of what we call a healthy heart or a healthy diet. Doctors recommend them. Labels promote them. Even the U.S. federal government recommends them and puts it in its food pyramid or its recommended plate. But here's what most people, even doctors and obviously the federal government, don't realize. These foods might be raising your blood sugar just as fast as a candy bar. By the end of this video, I'll show you why glucose spikes matter and how to choose the right carbohydrates without fear, guilt, or guesswork. And by the way, we discussed that in our new free ebook. If you'd like to get a copy, just go to the description of the video, get the link, and download it now. Now, I've heard many of the old school physician content creators say, oh, we don't know whether glucose spikes matter or not. The research hasn't been done. When you look at metabolic disease, it's two things: glucose spikes and insulin spikes. If you want to wait until those content creators are saying, yes, they're dangerous, go ahead. That's actually what most people are doing because they just aren't watching what's going on. But if you're like me and you want to stop those glucose spikes, those insulin spikes, if you believe the evidence that I've seen that says glucose spikes and insulin spikes do inflame your arteries, then stick with this video and we'll talk about how to avoid those. Let's start with the most common healthy breakfast, healthy, that people turn to and why it doesn't work for everybody. Let me tell you about Bill. Bill was 55, active, and doing everything right. Well, at least according to the standards, the standard advice. He had recently learned that his A1C was creeping into the pre-diabetic range. So he got serious about this. He stopped buying granola bars, which most people don't think of. He stopped putting sugar in his coffee, and he swapped out his usual toast for something he'd always heard was healthier: oatmeal. This wasn't regular cereal like Fruit Loops or the Kelsey Mix. This was the kind that came in the little packet with the words "heart healthy." And in fact, there was a heart right on the package, right there on the label. I hear this all the time. Doc, you can't tell me that oatmeal's not good for you. It is, right? You know, I used to debate this point with people. I just don't, and I got worn out. I don't debate it anymore because I've seen the data and I've seen it over and over and over again. Yes, oatmeal is technically a whole grain. Yes, it has some fiber, particularly beta-glucan, which can support cholesterol levels. But those benefits don't mean it's metabolically harmless, especially not the kind Bill was eating. He was starting his day with instant oatmeal, maple and brown sugar, made in the microwave in under a minute. This is the quick oatmeal. It's the kind that's quickly cooked. It tastes great. I used to eat it. It really felt like a smart choice. But that one packet had almost 30 grams of carbohydrates. And because it was so highly processed, in fact, it had a glycemic index of 80, some of them even more. So it hits his bloodstream almost as bad as pure glucose and worse than pure table sugar, which is 50. So his blood sugar spiked fast within 30 to 40 minutes. And when that happens, your body sends in insulin to bring things back down. The higher the spike, the harder your body has to work. Bill didn't realize that was happening. He couldn't feel it. All he knew was that around 10 a.m., sometimes he felt a little bit shaky, a little bit hungry. He needed a little bit more coffee. He thought maybe he had not eaten enough. But really, he had eaten too fast, or rather, his glucose had raised too fast. After watching a few of these YouTube videos, Bill realized what might be happening. So he tried to fix it. He switched to rolled oats instead of the plain kind with no flavor packets. But it didn't work. His numbers still kept climbing because rolled oats still contain about the same amount of carbs, just under 30 grams per serving. And they digest a little bit slower than instant oats, but not enough to prevent that spike, especially if they're eaten alone. And there was an additional problem here. Bill was adding bananas and raisins and a little bit of brown sugar because that's what he had read was healthy, and it certainly tasted good. So instead of seeing lower glucose numbers, that combination made everything even worse. So every morning, he was starting his day with a glucose surge, followed by a bigger insulin response, followed by a crash. And that roller coaster repeated throughout the day. So the main problem was he thought he was doing it right, but his metabolism was treating that oatmeal like it was a dessert. So when insulin stays elevated like that again and again, day after day, your cells eventually just give up and stop listening. That's how insulin resistance begins. That and just plain old aging. And that's when your brain, your heart, your energy levels start to suffer, even if you don't feel sick yet. Now, let me be clear here. I'm not saying that all oatmeal is bad. Actually, I like a specific type of oatmeal. And every year or two, I'll get into a season of eating it for a few weeks. Steel-cut oats. Steel-cut oats, not rolled, not instant. Every metabolism is different, and it's really hard to predict what will happen to you. You do have to test yourself. I get a little bit of a bump with steel-cut oats, but not like with instant or rolled. Now, there's one thing that's clear for me. If you already have insulin resistance, be careful about the oatmeal you're having for breakfast. Number 2, whole wheat bread. I've got another example for you. This is Mark's story. Mark is 52. He's always been thoughtful about his health. He's the kind of guy who reads food labels and tracks his steps. He's not doing any crash diets or shortcuts. He's just trying to follow the rules, the way his doctor told him to do. So when his cholesterol started climbing, he made some changes. He cut back on white bread and pasta. He replaced them with better carbs, whole wheat, brown rice, multigrain cereal. 2 slices of whole wheat toast twice a day became part of his daily routine, usually with eggs or sometimes with almond butter. It felt like a healthy swap to Mark. That's why he did it. It felt like at least it should be a healthy swap because of everything he's been told. We've all been told this. Healthy whole grains. By dietitians, by doctors, by the U.S. federal government. Whole wheat's supposed to be a smarter choice. It has more fiber, more nutrients. It's less processed. It's clearly marketed as a health food. But after a few months, Mark actually started noticing some patterns. He wasn't sleeping as well. He felt more tired after breakfast than before it. He was getting hungrier earlier in the day, even though his meals hadn't changed. We put him on a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, just to take a closer look. And guess what? Right away, we saw him spiking. His blood sugar was jumping 40, 50, 60 points within half an hour of eating that toast, even though it was labeled 100% whole wheat. Anytime your blood sugar goes over 140 after eating a meal, think about that. That should not be happening. Your insulin receptors should be, and your insulin mechanism should be able to keep that blood sugar lower than that. If you look at Jenny Rule's book, Blood Sugar 101, she's got a great chapter on what levels of blood glucose start causing inflammation and plaque. She focuses on 140. Anytime it goes over 200, that's got to be more serious. And yes, again, I've heard some of these classically trained physicians, and I'm a classically trained physician. I'm also into prevention, though. I've heard some docs who are skeptics say there's no evidence indicating that blood sugar spikes cause a problem. That's really what diabetes is. And we know that diabetes rots your arteries. So if you want to wait for those doctors to agree, fine. I'm not waiting. I'm going ahead and working on those spikes. At any time it goes over 200, I think it's a serious problem. And you don't want to leave it up there. It's these people that have these toast or oatmeal for breakfast, then they have a Big Mac meal with fries for lunch and pasta for dinner, and their blood sugar is going over 200 most of the day. That is a huge problem in terms of arterial inflammation. Now, let's get back to Mark. All this didn't make sense to him, at least at first, because he wasn't eating sugar. He wasn't drinking juice. He was eating something with fiber, something everybody said, it's a carb, but it's a slow carb. Let's talk about that. Whole wheat bread still raises blood sugar because it's mostly starch. So when starch gets digested, your body breaks it down into glucose fast. Whole wheat flour has slightly more fiber than white flour. There's no question about that. but it's just not much. Once it's ground into flour and baked into bread, that whole grain advantage just gets smaller and smaller. The way the bread is processed, it makes it easy for enzymes, even in your saliva, before you even swallow it, to start breaking this down into sugar. Your small intestine, boom, it really gets it going. That fast breakdown leads to a fast rise in blood sugar. It's especially true when you eat it on its own or with just a small amount of protein or fat. So even though Mark was eating something healthier than your average pastry or pasta, white breads, his body was still reacting to it the same way it would react to sugar because it was turning into sugar. 2 slices of whole wheat bread contain about 30 to 35 grams of carbohydrates. The glycemic index, how quickly and how much it turns into sugar, is usually between 65 and 75. That is higher than table sugar. You could make the case that he would have done better just eating sugar out of the dish on the table. Whole wheat bread raises blood sugar as quickly as table sugar in most people. So if somebody's already showing signs of insulin resistance or prediabetes, and many people do in their 40s and 50s, and if you think you don't, and you haven't had an insulin response test, a Kraft insulin survey, a OGTT with insulin response, or even just worn a simple glucometer, be afraid. Make sure that you get these tests. People in their 40s and 50s are often surprised. I did not know I had metabolic disease. And again, over 50% of us have it starting at age 18. So whether they knew it or not, these repeated spikes were going to hit harder and last longer because they're metabolic disease, because they were resistant to insulin. It just tended to stay there. That's what was happening to Mark. He thought he was doing the right thing. And in a way, he was. He wasn't grabbing muffins or bagels. They truly would have been worse. He was trying to eat better, but his metabolism just could not keep up with the demand at this point in his life. Every morning, that toast was kicking off a spike in blood sugar, followed by a big dose of insulin. So what's the problem with that? Remember, insulin is a storage hormone. When it's elevated, it pushes glucose into fat cells, and it tells the body, hold on to that fat, and that fat makes it harder to burn fat. Insulin makes it harder to burn fat. So Mark's energy crashed because that insulin was shutting off his metabolic mechanism for turning that sugar into energy and saying, hey, wait a minute, let's don't burn that. Let's turn it into fat. His hunger increased. His weight started creeping up, even though his diet really hadn't changed that much. And that was the frustrating part for Mark. People are doing what they're told, and they're still getting worse because no one explains how foods like whole wheat bread actually work inside the body. Now, this doesn't mean that bread is the enemy, but it can be dangerous. It does mean that we need to be honest about how carbohydrate-dense bread is and how quickly that bread turns into sugar. For someone who's insulin sensitive, a small amount of bread, especially whole wheat, paired with fiber, fat, protein, almond butter, that's just fine. But for someone who, like Mark, who had significant prediabetes, and no, he did not know it like most, these healthy carbs quietly become a problem. Number 3, brown rice. A few years ago, I had a patient. We'll call him Darren. He was 39, a software engineer, and he'd been doing everything the way he thought he was supposed to do. He didn't drink soda. He didn't eat fast food. He'd been starting to prepare more meals at home, mostly bowls with grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a big scoop of brown rice. He told me, I figured if I was cooking at home and eating clean, I'd be fine. And in some ways, he was, but not entirely. At his last physical, his doctor mentioned that his fasting glucose had been ticking up a bit. Maybe not dangerously high, but enough to raise the eyebrow, get his attention. His triglycerides were starting to climb. His LDL was starting to climb. His energy levels were starting to dip. He hadn't made any drastic changes to his routine, so he couldn't figure out why was that stuff happening. When he reached out to my team, we started tracking his blood sugar with a continuous glucose monitor. We wanted to see how his body was responding to those clean carbs. He was surprised with what we found. Right after his first meal, the usual meal, the lunch, chicken, veggies, brown rice, he saw the spike. His blood sugar jumped over 50 points and stayed elevated for a couple of hours. And that wasn't a sugary meal. It wasn't a sandwich. It wasn't a slice of cake. It wasn't a Big Mac. It was grilled chicken and vegetables and what he thought was the healthiest carb on the planet. But here's the thing. Brown rice still raises blood sugar because it's mostly starch, and starch is just long chains of glucose. Once it hits your digestive tract, your body breaks it down quickly, and it moves it into your bloodstream. 1 cup of cooked brown rice has about 45 to 50 grams of carbohydrates. And even though it's less processed than white rice, its glycemic index is still 50 to 65, higher than table sugar. Now, that's still not as high as a lot of processed foods, sure, but it's high enough to create a significant glucose spike, especially in someone who's already starting to lose insulin sensitivity, becoming pre-diabetic. The part that surprised Darren the most was how subtle it all was. He wasn't eating junk, but he was still triggering those blood sugar surges, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and that was enough to keep his insulin levels high, his energy low, and his metabolism stuck in second gear. Now, I'm not saying brown rice is bad, and it's clearly healthier than white rice, for example, but it's still a high carbohydrate food. And if you're already dealing with prediabetes, insulin resistance, metabolic disease, these big servings of brown rice can make things worse, and you don't even know it. In Darren's case, he really loved the brown rice and he thought it was healthy. But he acknowledged his challenges and he started scaling back, a half a cup instead of a full one, and then he replaced it entirely, loading up more on vegetables and protein and saving the rice for times when he was having a workout, when his muscles would be ready and better equipped to use that glucose. So these small adjustments made a huge difference. His energy came back, his fasting glucose dropped, and more importantly, he understood why all this was happening. This is what I want people to know. Even healthy foods can cause problems if your body isn't handling them well. Number 4, protein bars. Months ago, a patient of mine, we'll call her Tina, got very surprised after finding the truth about this next food. She works in tech sales, travels for work almost every week, and does her best to stay on top of her health while juggling a demanding travel schedule. She's not someone who eats fast food. She drinks her coffee black, skips dessert, tracks her steps daily. She's disciplined and proud of it. Her go-to during busy travel days was protein bars. She kept a few in her purse, a couple in her laptop bag, and a whole stash in the pantry at home. Well, they're better than chips, she said, and they are perfect since I always don't have time to sit down for a real meal. Her favorite ones had big health claims right on the front, like keto-friendly, low net carbs, 0 sugar added, and that one's my favorite. So these things gave her peace of mind. She felt like she was doing the right thing, the healthy thing. But she started gaining a few pounds right around her midsection and noticed her energy was crashing in the early afternoon, then mid-afternoon and late. But then her fasting glucose started to hit 105 at her physical. She got curious. That's when she decided to track her blood sugar again with a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. And sure enough, the biggest spike of her entire week didn't come from a restaurant meal or a holiday treat. It came from her favorite protein bar, one they claimed to be low carb. Her glucose jumped over 50 points, and it took 2 hours to come back down. But that's something I see more often than people realize. These bars say 4 grams net carbs on the front. And when you flip them over and read the actual label, you'll see 25, 30 or more grams of total carbohydrates. And most of those carbs are coming from ingredients like maltodextrin. Be very concerned when you see that word, maltodextrin. Soluble corn, glycerin, sugar alcohols, things that aren't technically sugars, but still behave like fast carbs once they're inside your body. Tina had no idea. She genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, skipping snacks, avoiding sugar, fueling herself with something clean and easy to pack in her bags. But in reality, her body was reaching to those bars and saying, this is like a dessert. This is like a candy bar. The blood sugar spike was just as steep, and the insulin response was just as strong as it would have been with a candy bar. Now, not all protein bars are created equal. Some are made with better ingredients and have a more balanced macronutrient profile. and processed components. Real protein, fiber, healthy fats, again, not much processed components. But most of the ones that you find in airport kiosks or gas stations, the things that sell well, they're popular. They're popular because they taste good, and they taste good because they're sweet and processed. They're glorified candy bars with a protein label slapped on the wrapper. And even some of the ones in health food stores, especially those labeled as keto or low sugar, be very careful. Learn to read the label. Don't go for keto-friendly or no sugar added. These things can be loaded with ingredients that still cause a reaction in people that are already metabolically compromised. The problem isn't the idea of a protein bar, it's the way people are using them. When you grab one as a quick snack, you might be okay. But when you treat it like a meal or eat it on an empty stomach in the middle of the day, you're much more likely to see a strong glucose response, especially if your body's already struggling to maintain metabolic balance. So for Tina, this was an easy fix. She just changed for real protein bars, good ones, and she was able to choose other better food options, more natural and richer on healthy proteins and fats. Once she made that change, her energy crashes stopped. The weight gain levels leveled out, and more importantly, she fell back in control because she understood what was happening. So if you're relying on protein bars to get you through the day, your blood sugar may be paying the price, even if everything on the wrapper says it's healthy. Number 5, smoothies. This may be the most surprising food that challenges blood glucose. Let me tell you about Ellen. She's 58 years old. She walks every morning, and like most of my patients, she's trying to eat a clean diet. Her fridge is stocked with leafy greens, unprocessed meat, small fruits like berries, strawberries. She usually skips breakfast, but her lunch is usually a smoothie, sometimes blended with banana, blueberries, a little juice, a scoop of granola, some almond butter. And on weekends, she treats herself to an acai bowl from her favorite cafe. An acai bowl is a cold, thick, smoothie-like mixture made primarily from acai berries, which are small, dark, purple fruits native to the Amazon forest. The staff knew her by name. They'd hand it over with sliced banana, fresh berries, coconut flakes, a drizzle of honey. That was her fave. They knew it, and they got it ready as soon as they saw her coming. It was colorful. It was packed with antioxidants, and it felt like a treat she didn't have to feel guilty about. She loved it. But her body didn't. Her labs told a very different story. Her fasting glucose continued to climb, now up to 110. Her A1C had moved into the pre-diabetic range. It was in the mid to high fives, and she couldn't figure out why. She basically changed her lifestyle for this. In fact, she had already lost about 20 pounds, but her sugar was still climbing back up. When we tracked her blood sugar with a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, we saw the problem almost immediately. After her morning smoothie, her glucose, it would jump 50 to 60 points and even more. After her Saturday acai bowl, it went even higher, sometimes well into the 200s. The issue wasn't that acai berries are bad. In fact, real acai is low in sugar and high in antioxidants. That wasn't the problem. The problem is the other stuff. Most smoothies and acai bowl recipes don't just use acai. They use bananas, fruit juice, mango, dates, just little sugar bombs, sometimes even honey and agave. So when all that gets blended up and poured into a bowl, it goes down fast and sweet, and it hits your bloodstream even faster. Blending fruits breaks down the fiber. That means that sugars absorb even more quickly. And even if the ingredients are natural, like fruit and honey, natural, they still deliver a heavy glucose load. Most smoothies or bowls contain 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrates, sometimes even more. And they're usually not eaten alone. No protein, no fat, nothing to slow any of this absorption, these carb absorptions down. But her metabolism wasn't ready to handle the glucose load of those smoothies. Her insulin is still surging, and that surge repeated over and over again during the exact kind of insulin resistance she was trying to avoid. It was helping drive it. We made a few changes. We pulled back on the juice, the fruit-heavy bowls. We added protein and fiber like chia seeds and flax seeds. We made her smoothies smaller. We saved them for after her morning walk when her body was more insulin sensitive. And we cut back on all those sugars that were going in with it. Within a couple of weeks, her numbers began to shift. The glucose spikes began to slow down. Her energy improved. And for the first time in years, that scale actually started to move again, backing up slowly but steadily and without extreme changes. This is what people miss. Acai bowls, smoothies might feel like healthy food, but for many people, especially as we get over 50 and it becomes more and more and more common that we can't digest and metabolize carbs so well, these things behave like a dessert. Once you understand that, you don't have to give them up forever. You just have to use them more wisely with the right timing, the right balance, and make sure that you know what else is going in there. Get a clearer view of what's actually going on inside your body. Test. Don't guess. Remember at the end of the video, I was going to clear out the confusion behind glucose spikes. Let's talk about that. Let me clarify this now. It's not that a single glucose spike is a problem. In fact, I routinely will have them, especially after some celebratory meals that I tend to have with my family on a weekly basis. I've got some family members that are some of the best cooks ever. And they cook great food specifically for me, which is I can't appreciate more. But sometimes I like to try a little of that dessert. I don't flinch when sometimes I get a glucose spike, 150, 180, even over 200. I just know what to do about it. I don't keep it there hour after hour. I'll take a walk. I'll come home. I'll get on the assault bike and pull that blood sugar level back down. And by the way, we have documented multiple times that I continue to stabilize my plaque. So this is not about never getting a blood sugar spike. It's about how often you get them, how high they go, and how long it stays up there, and how much insulin you're having to use to get it back down. So that's why we like things like glucose monitors. Despite some accuracy challenges, they're really good for looking at these patterns. The key player here, the foods you're eating. And by the way, we discussed that in our new free ebook. If you'd like to get a copy, just go to the description of the video, get the link, and download it now. During the video, we discussed glycemic index. I know exactly what some of you are saying. Glycemic index is not good. It doesn't take into account the quantity of the foods, other things like fiber, protein, fat, etc. These things will reduce glucose absorption. All of that's very true. And because of that, it is better to look at the glycemic load. Glycemic load is better to identify the impact based on both the type of carbohydrate and the portion size. In this chart, you'll find glycemic index and glycemic load for each of the foods we've discussed in this video. Remember, a moderate glycemic index is anything above 56. I would say actually 40 to 75. A high glycemic index is 75 or even 70 and above. I avoid those foods. For a glycemic load, a moderate glycemic load is anything above 11, and a high glycemic load is anything above 20. But we got a lot of geeks that watch this channel because we get technical sometimes. There's yet another way to assess how good a carbohydrate is and how much damage it might be doing for those geeks that are interested. Let me tell you about the carbohydrate to fiber ratio. It's actually really simple. You look at the total grams of carbohydrates, compare them to the grams of fiber. And yes, I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, fiber's bad for you. If you can't eat fiber, and if you're not a person that does eat fiber, this is not a great ratio for you. Just don't worry about that. But for those of us who do eat fiber, and I'm one of those people, the more fiber a food has relative to its total carbs, the slower it's digested. Same thing happens with fat and protein. The less dramatic the glucose spike tends to be, the more fiber you have in it, or fat or protein. The ideal ratio for the carb-to-fiber ratio is 5-to-1 or less. That means for every 5 grams of carbs, there's at least a gram of fiber. Lower's better, like 3-to-1 or 2-to-1, especially for people managing insulin. Once you start reading labels, though, and you're thinking about the carb-to-fiber ratio, you quickly spot the difference between carbs that work for your body and carbs that don't. Let's take a look at the foods we've talked about so far. The ratio for instant oatmeal, 10. Rolled oats, 6-to-7. Whole wheat bread, 7. Brown rice and protein bars, up to 12. Smoothies, even up to 15. In comparison, you find steel-cut oats with a carbohydrate-to-fiber ratio 5 or less. But if this is too complicated, this is what you can do. You don't need to cut out carbs completely. You don't need to stop eating oats or rice forever. But you do need to understand how these foods affect your body. Your body, not somebody else's. Use a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. Just 2 weeks. And no, don't wait for your insurance company to pay for it. I've had to pay for every one of mine. And I have no idea how many I've used. Dozens. You'll learn more than any app or article could ever teach you about your own metabolism. Because you'll stop guessing. You'll start testing. You'll start seeing the actual results, what these foods do to your body. If you really want oatmeal, use steel-cut oats. Eat fiber, fat, protein before eating them. Put a little almond butter in there. Keep rice to smaller portions. Choose to eat it before or after an intense workout. Build your smoothie with berries, protein, and fiber. Choose bars with simple, whole ingredients, or just skip them entirely, because stable blood sugar means stable energy and better health. Stable blood sugar means fewer cravings, better focus, less inflammation, better metabolism, less arterial plaque. If this video has you rethinking your approach to heart health, maybe that's a good thing. I've put together something that'll help you. It's my 7-step heart attack prevention protocol. It's simple. It's a practical guide. It's what we use with our own patients. It covers the tests that actually matter, which supplements to focus on, and the lifestyle shifts, mostly lifestyle shifts that move the needle. So click the link below and get your copy. It's free. If any of these foods surprised you, let me know in the comments below. I did a video on the best foods to lower sugar. Why don't you watch it right here?